Hey, so I've been seeing a lot of this idea, and it's not just cultural. It's not just found on Facebook. It's also found in articles that you see online. But this idea that narcissists cannot change. Um, so I want to kind of address that, and I want to address why certain professionals say narcissists cannot change, and also why people experience narcissists as somebody who doesn't change. So narcissists can actually change. They can heal. It's not likely, but the reason why a narcissist has trouble changing is because for a narcissist to admit they're a narcissist, for them to acknowledge narcissism, they're acknowledging a part of themselves that is, in their eyes, all bad. The moment that they recognize any of their mistakes, they are all bad. And what they get hit with is a flood of shame, an overwhelming amount of shame. And what that shame does is it causes their amygdala, which is if you got your right and left hemisphere and they wrap over your amygdala, it's where your emotional responses are primarily centered around this area. And this is where trauma is stored. It's the same thing for PTSD. It's the same thing that happens when we are in an emotional situation and we just react. Like if a ball flies at us and we catch it. So if something gets stored in the amygdala and it doesn't make connections between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, then you have no capacity to soothe yourself when you get triggered. So what happens is your amygdala will shut down your prefrontal cortex and you won't think clearly. You'll just be in reaction or survival mode. A narcissist has learned in their childhood that they cannot be bad, because if they're bad, they're worthless. They're left with total shame. And it's the difference between guilt and shame. Shame is I am the problem. I am bad. I don't deserve life, whatever that is, whatever that looks like. It isn't the same as guilt, which is I made a mistake, but I still have worth. There's a difference between guilt and shame. And for a narcissist who grows up in a home where it's performance driven, where for them, they are constantly shamed, constantly put down, they're never enough because whatever reason their parent is trying to strive them on. And generationally speaking, narcissists do have narcissistic parents. It's not always the case, but it is more likely if you have a borderline or narcissistic parent that you will be borderline or narcissistic as well. And so what's happening is these people have learned that I have to perform to have value. I've externalized my value. Everything about value for me to feel that I am lovable or worth is externalized. But because I never feel like I'm enough to earn my parents' attention, my primary caregiver's attention, then I have to perform. And I internalize this level of performance onto myself to where no matter what I do, I can't hear or look at my mistakes. I have to have defenses, ego defenses against that idea, or else I am all bad. That's moving from poor attachment, which is my emotional needs not being met. So I have to learn how to cope. And then it moves into your integration, which is the second level of character development. And when you're integration, it's about the good and bad in self and the good and bad of others. And your value, if it isn't stored in a healthy attachment, then it becomes externalized and I have to perform, or I give up and I go into depression. So a narcissist will primarily camp in the all good section. And then if they are hit overwhelmed, then they will go to the all bad and have suicidal thoughts, all these different things. But generally speaking, they try very hard unconsciously to stay in the all good. They have to have control over others, their primary anxiety, they're outward focused. So if you're trying to address a relationship with a narcissist or a relationship issue with a narcissist, then you're going to run into that problem in itself because they can't hear your logic behind it. If you are hurt by someone who's narcissistic and you want to have a better relationship with them, you want to resolve something and you confront them, their amygdala shuts down their prefrontal cortex and they hear you're attacking them. They feel abused. And then they will project that responsibility onto you. And then they become abusive without realizing that that's what they're doing. And they think you're the abuser. And that's where that gets confusing because their brain is telling them they're under attack because of childhood trauma. Now, when you're using a cognitive approach, that is the most common forms of therapy that insurance companies really like because of short-term measurable results. You are basically teaching the client how to symptom manage. And the idea came about not too long ago that our thoughts control our feelings. But in reality, our brain doesn't work that way. You can't just control your feelings and get rid of PTSD. A soldier who's been in war and an IED blows up and hurts him and his mates, he's not going to just simply control that because his amygdala doesn't have connections with his prefrontal cortex. And so when he gets overwhelmed by, let's say, a firecracker, it shuts down and time doesn't exist anymore. He is back in his childhood. And that is exactly what happens with all pathologies, with all emotional disturbances. They're all stored with big and small traumas in the amygdala that cause them to shut down the prefrontal cortex. So for a narcissist to heal, though, they have to experience vulnerability, but that's the scariest thing for them. So the antithesis, I think is the right word, to narcissism is empathetic attunement. And a narcissist comes into my office, for instance, and he is talking about how everyone at work is jealous of him, and he is he they don't like him for whatever reason, whatever it is. Then my response is to be, no one ever recognizes you for what you're worth. I'm not validating his position. I'm validating his emotional experience because the amygdala keeps emotional experience there. And then over time, as we keep playing the circus back and forth, where I start validating him, he starts to feel these triggers. His brain, under a brain scan, will start lighting up near his amygdala, and I will keep targeting that, and he will keep coming up with defenses, keep going back and forth, until eventually there's a crack. And there's no telling how long this takes. But eventually there's a crack, and what he learns is that he's not getting the same experience he got in his childhood when he was vulnerable. For him to be vulnerable with me or someone who is empathetically attuning, he then feels some semblance of comfort, which causes other ego defenses to come up, and they have to be attuned to as well. But systematically, you keep attuning, and giving what's called a mismatching experience. It's called memory reconsolidation. And then what happens is the amygdala starts to get soothed, the trauma starts to get resolved, and then connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala happen. And then next time there's a trigger, such as for a soldier, a firecracker, or for confrontation for a narcissist being confronted about something they've mistaken, they don't get their amygdala to shut down their prefrontal because they're able to hear it because there's been connections made. That's how a narcissist heals. So can a narcissist heal? Absolutely. But it won't be through cognitive approaches. You'll just learn to symptom manage. It has to be through the natural wiring of the brain, how the brain was designed to both register trauma, and that's a form of being adaptation. So if I experience some type of trauma in my life or some type of emotional experience, I learn to adapt to that so that I'm not going to be without defenses. I can protect myself. That's why they say these coping mechanisms you have in childhood protect you, but then when you become an adult, they imprison you. And they also influence your outlook and everything in your relationships, your job, everything about how you interact with those things. And you'll find other people that mirror those ideas. But that's entirely off subject. So anyways, if you have any more questions, please let me know. Hope you like this video. Please like and share and subscribe. Thank you.